Hey, buddy, watch this.
Hello, hello, Regis Kilbin is the name, and Hearthstone is the game, and it's time to review some cards. That's right, the Witchwood has been announced, the new Hearthstone expansion, and 6 new cards have been announced to go right alongside it, including 3 new neutral legendary minions, a handful of new keywords and mechanics, and frankly some crazy stuff all around, so I'm really looking forward to diving into these cards. Now, as always, I'm going to be doing some detailed card reviews up first. If you're somebody who doesn't have a ton of time, you just want to see the card reveals and my quick 5-star ratings, you can use the link in the description to skip to that point in the video. If you do have some time, you want to hear me talk at great length about these cards, then let's go ahead and jump into that right now. Starting up first here, we have Ginn Greymane, a new neutral legendary minion, and hey, an actual recognizable lore character from Warcraft. That's not something we see every day in Hearthstone, so that's really exciting for me personally. I always thought Ginn Greymane was a pretty sweet character, and clearly very fitting for the Worgen-esque expansion theme here. But Ginn Greymane is a 6-mana 6/5 that introduces clearly something that's going to be one of the new mechanics for this expansion, as we are going to see in the following card as well. He has a start of game effect that works very similar to something like Prince Malchezaar's effect that starts at the beginning of the game, and that is that if your deck has only even cost cards, your starting hero power costs 1. So a bit like Prince Keleseth's deck restrictions for a really powerful effect. Now, first and foremost, I think we need to discuss the fact that a 1-mana hero power is really, really good. Even with Raza today, not bad. Now, clearly Raza used to make your hero power for Priest 0, but this is for every class. And the potential there is really, really big. In particular, I think Hunter can really benefit from a 1-mana hero power, just getting that insane damage through every turn for only 1 mana. That's hyper efficient and near endless pressure that Hunter can utilize really well. Paladin, I think, has some great ways to use a 1-mana Silverhand recruit. Frankly, 1-mana 1/1's not bad in the first place, but clearly Silverhand synergies are a deck and a thing right now, and this could empower that even more. And clearly other classes can also do some work with a 1-mana hero power. Now, keep in mind this only applies to starting hero power, so this isn't something, for instance, to empower a card like Shadow Reaper Anduin or any of the Death Knights. It does not extend to refreshed hero powers like that, so that's one limitation as far as putting this into different decks, so don't let your mind spiral out of control right away. It's going to take some baseline hero powers to make this a sensible inclusion in any given deck. There are other classes I think are weak. Like, for instance, I don't know that Priest is great at the baseline hero power. Yeah, Raza is awesome combined with Anduin, but not as good with just a 2-mana or 2 health heal. For instance, Rogue 2 doesn't work all that well because this is the kind of thing you're going to want to take advantage of as often as possible, like every single turn. And Rogue really only gets the value out of the hero power every other turn. So they're kind of having the cost reduction value of Ginn Greymane immediately. Now you might say, oh, you could use it with Kingsbane to refresh your hero power really cheaply, but you can't. Kingsbane's a 1-cost card. And there's the rub for Ginn Greymane, right? That is really the ultimate challenge. And although we've established that a 1-mana hero power is good, is it worth the downside of completely restricting how your deck is built? And in my opinion, I'm going to have to say most of the time, probably not. I think this deck restriction is much, much worse than something like we've seen with Prince Keleseth or any of the princes from Knights of the Frozen Throne. You're essentially cutting your options in half. It's making it much harder to build a smooth curve. Things just aren't going to fit together quite as well in any given turn, despite the increased flexibility of your hero power. So in some ways, it's like, yes, you get this cost-reduced hero power, which sounds like an advantage, but the problem is you desperately need that to even make your deck competitive in the first place. So it's not necessarily an advantage so much as just something that allows this to be a challenge in the first place. So I think as far as the risk-reward balancing act here for Ginn Greymane goes, it's much, much higher in the risk category than the reward category. Now, that said, I do think a couple classes could potentially maybe make a deck out of Ginn Greymane. Paladin and Hunter in particular stand out to me right now. Both of them have some pretty good even cost cards and ways to utilize that 1-mana hero power most effectively. If you think about Paladin, there's Call to Arms at 4. That's fantastic. There's Tarim at 6. That's amazing. There's Light Fuse Stegadon at 4. So there's your dude deck coming together already. Sure, you lose level up and stand against darkness, but you might be able to piece together other things. Hunter does lose some really good 3-drops, and they can't do things like Secret and Spellstone, but still, with that much pressure, with Crackling Razor Maw, with some Secrets, with Houndmaster, I bet Hunter could still put together a reasonable deck to apply enough pressure to win the game. So, like I said, big challenge for Ginn Greymane, probably even more challenging than Prince Keliseth, and not quite as high-rolly of a swing and not as big of a swing either. The hero power takes a long time to be worth it. Ginn Greymane himself's a pretty terrible minion as a 6-mana 6/5. That's just not a card you want to draw or you want to have in your deck, so you're also kind of compromising your deck's integrity and the consistency of your deck. Some big challenges to overcome. I think this will be a super fun deck building exercise and challenge, and of course I'm going to try it. It'll be awesome and exciting, but I don't think this is going to be a card that necessarily sees any sort of consistent, regular constructed play, which is unfortunate. But we'll see. Maybe some genius out there will build the perfect deck that I never even thought of. I certainly hope I'm wrong. I certainly hope they do. And moving on to the second card here up for review, it's basically Ginn Greymane version 2.0, but flipped around. This is Baku the Mooneater. And before I get into the actual card, look at that artwork. That is so freaking cool. It's a giant snake dragon thing. You can see like tiny little houses and trees. That's how big it is. And the colors are fantastic. The mood is awesome. What a sweet looking card art. That's maybe one of my favorite card arts ever. I absolutely love it. But Baku the Mooneater here is a 9-mana 7/8 beast. Similar start of the game effect to Ginn Greymane, but this time around your deck can only have odd cost cards, and it simply upgrades your hero power. Now, upgrading your hero power has been confirmed the exact same as we've seen in the past with the card Justicar Trueheart. I'm not going to go through every hero power, but I think the ones that most often utilized Trueheart were like Priest for the 4 health heal. Paladin used it some to gain multiple dudes in a single turn, 2 1/1s. That could be an unending swarm that won you games. And then I think most notably was Warrior to gain 4 armor every single turn to just hit those enormous armor totals. So clearly, as far as the reward goes, Baku is fantastic. That's going to add up a lot. Some classes are going to want to utilize that. I would argue it's maybe even better than the discount from Ginn Greymane, particularly for some classes. Noteworthy too for this card versus something like Justicar Trueheart is that this happens at the start of the game. Unlike Trueheart, which required it to get to turn 6 or really even turn 7 before you could utilize your hero power, this one on turn 2 you can hero power. And that's going to be important because you don't have a 2-drop in your deck because you can only run odd cost cards. So you're going to need that hero power to really add up and contribute to the game because, of course, once again, you're sacrificing your curve, you're sacrificing your consistency, you're passing up a lot of good cards, and frankly, the card pool just isn't that big right now. Stuff's rotating out. We're missing a couple expansions in the standard format rotation. So it's hard to build using only half of your Hearthstone collection. Now, I think there's some interesting things to consider here. As far as which hero powers are going to be best with Baku. Namely, if you're having the hero power on turn 2, then you might need hero powers which very directly and immediately impact the board. For instance, Hunter hero power might not add up fast enough. You don't want to be hitting your opponent for 3 health on turn 2. You're just sacrificing so much tempo and so much onboard presence. But Mage, for instance, might be able to kill a minion. That could be really good. Warrior might still be good just because it gives you time. You're defending, you're armoring up, you're gaining life, you're playing into removal in the mid-game. Priest might not be good enough. A 4 health heal on turn 2 probably isn't going to matter because you haven't taken 4 damage yet, so that one might not be worth it. You got to consider which of these are going to be most impactful. Frankly, with Paladin, it'd be great to summon 2 1/1s on turn 2. That's an awesome turn. So maybe Paladin makes a lot of sense here, but then again, can Paladin afford to give up even cost cards? Can you sacrifice Skull Arms? Can you sacrifice Tyrion? Can you sacrifice Sunkeeper Tarim? The hits keep on coming for even cost cards with Paladin. So it's once again balancing the risk-reward, fitting together all the puzzle pieces to see what makes sense and what works. On top of that, Baku the Mooneater, of course, a really expensive card to play itself. Really dead card to draw into, so aggro decks would be hyper punished by drawing a 9-mana 7/8. That's just not very useful. Despite the fact that it's a beast, I don't think Hunter really cares. So some consideration there, just adding another dead card to your deck. It might work better in slower, more mid-rangey, or particularly control kind of environment. So I think if Baku the Mooneater is going to make any sense, it really might only be in like a really control warrior, maybe paladin, but I still think that's a big challenge. So much like Ginn Greymane, there's a chance somebody finds the magic deck and the perfect deck list to fit all this stuff in and make it work. But it's a really, really tough challenge, and I think it's pretty unlikely, and I don't know that compromising your options in such an enormous and monumental way is ever going to be better than just playing a straight deck with all the cards that you want to run. So much like Ginn Greymane, big challenge here. Clearly, people were proven wrong with the Princes, all of which saw some level of play. We thought that those deck challenge compromises were going to be too big, and they weren't. So there's a bit of a trap here that I could be walking into and saying that Baku and Genn aren't that playable. But I actually gave Prince Keleseth 3 stars. I thought he was a solid card, had potential when you looked at the numbers. That wasn't that big of a sacrifice. This is a much bigger sacrifice, much harder cards to play themselves than Prince Keleseth. And frankly, the rewards, I'm not sure, are better than something like Prince Keleseth. So to me, Genn and Baku have a lot of problems, some fundamental issues here. So unless Blizzard does something that we can't imagine to empower these in some other way, I don't see either one getting a ton of play. So now let's move on to Legendary number 3. This is Azalina Soulthief, a 7-mana 3/3. Ooh, that is a tough stat line for the cost. And the battle cry for Azalina reads, replace your hand with a copy of your opponent's. So you're straight up just copying your opponent's cards and putting them into your hand. So wow, let's think about the implications of that and how you might utilize this card. So clearly as a 7 cost 3/3, you're not going to be enjoying the body of this card. You're sacrificing a lot right off the bat in terms of tempo and board presence. This thing just sucks to play. So you're going to have to utilize the battle cry in a very, very powerful way and be able to swing the game really, really hard with the battle cry for this one to ever make any sort of sense. And the problem there, of course, is that how can you swing using the same cards that your opponent has? It's a big challenge. So for instance, in a control environment, if you're a control deck and you're playing an aggro deck, you don't need Azalina because you don't care about aggro cards. They don't have any cards in their hand anyway. You don't want to sacrifice your better cards for their lower cost and worst cards on average. Doesn't make sense in control v aggro. What about control v control? Does it make sense if you're a control deck and you want to steal your opponent's stuff? Well, the problem there, right, is that you probably built your deck with cards that suit your game plan and your style of play, and your opponent's cards may not work as well for you. You might get an execute when you don't have any way to deal damage or a ping or a whirlwind, so execute to you is useless. And you can think of 1,000 different interactions there where your cards are probably on average better than your opponent's cards. So I don't really see Azalina working as a standard control versus control sort of tool. Now, what about aggro? Would you play this as an aggro card? And then the answer is maybe. I could see a potential for Azalina as a sort of divine favor style card, where if you just apply a ton of pressure, you vomit your resources onto the board, Azalina is your last card in hand, you play her and you steal your opponent's stuff, it gives you more tools, more resources, it refills your hand, much like a card like Divine Favor refills your hand. And that could give you sort of a second wind to make another push, apply more pressure. The problem there, of course, right, is that you're going to be getting control cards, which sometimes won't help your game plan at all. You might get a couple brawls. And if you're an aggro deck looking to kill your opponent, a couple brawls are completely useless. They don't do anything, right? That's not your game plan at all. Now, sure, occasionally you might get like a Frostlich Jaina, and that's a great card that gives you another resource. That could certainly be the case, but I think those instances will be more rare rather than more common. When you play Divine Favor, you know you're consistently always getting more stuff that suits what you're trying to do. Not the case with Azalina, a lot more risk. Not to mention, of course, with Azalina, you're spending 7 mana. With Divine Favor, you're only spending 3, so often you can combine other things with it. Azalina just doesn't work out quite as well. There's hardly any mana left to actually do anything the same turn. So you're basically passing a turn, taking a dead turn, pushing the initiative back your opponent's way. So hard to recover from that as an aggro deck. So I don't really see this as that sort of last resort hand refill sort of card. Not to mention that your opponent, if Azalina ever became a popular meta card, your opponent knows it's coming and can play cards they don't want you to have. So they might be able to make decisions to punish your Azalina in the first place. So really, there's one last way this card could maybe see play, and I think this one's a big stretch too. And that is that Azalina could be a counter to maybe fatigue-style decks or maybe combo-style decks. In other words, if your opponent, for instance, is playing double Dead Man's Hand, and you know they're going to be able to go infinite in the game, perhaps you could play Azalina, copy their double Dead Man's Hands, and be able to out-fatigue them in their own game plan. Like, that could happen. But that would only be good if Dead Man's Hand Warrior were like 80% of the meta, because you don't want to run a terrible card to just beat the occasional matchup. That doesn't make any sense. It's too big of a sacrifice in every other matchup, so that would never work. And in combo decks, perhaps you could do things like copy your opponent's combo, but the problem, of course, there is, if they already have all their combo pieces in hand, that means they're going to play them. You're going to be dead. It doesn't matter if you copy them because they're going to have the opportunity to combo you and probably the better opportunity to support that combo. You're not stealing or disrupting their combo. You'd just be copying it. So I don't really see any value for Azalina there either. So ultimately, at the end of the day, to me, I don't know where Azalina gets played outside of meme or fun style decks. Clearly, it's going to be awesome to do. I want that to happen. Like, I'm going to play her. But I think there's just too much for her to overcome to ever actually be successful in standard format competitive play. So now let's move on to another card here. This is the Phantom Militia, a new 3-mana 2/4. It's got Taunt, and it's also got a new keyword, Echo. And Echo essentially works exactly like Unstable Evolution, where you play this card, you get an echo of it in your hand. As long as you have the mana, you can play it again. You get an echo of it of your hand, and as long as you have the mana, you can play it again. So 3 mana, you play 1. 6 mana, you can play 2. 9 mana, you could play 3. Echo is going to be a really interesting mechanic. There's got some pretty cool potential synergies there, things like Quest Rogue. The problem is Phantom Militia doesn't work in Quest Rogue. It's way too expensive. It would take forever to actually pull that off for it to make sense. You'd need 6, 9 mana to really get multiple instances of Phantom Militia. So that's not a consideration for this card right now. If you're thinking about Echo in all those fancy ways, just cool it for a second. Let's talk about Phantom Militia first. So clearly a 2/4 Taunt for 3 mana, not good enough to see play. That card exists, doesn't see play. So we got to consider the value of Echo. Is the flexibility of being able to play this in later turns worth it? And to me, in this specific instance with this card, no. Because this is clearly more of a defensively minded card. People who'd want to run this card would be playing it in slower, more control-style decks. And the thing if you're playing a control-style deck is, you usually have cards in hand that you want to play. You usually have multiple things you can do in a single turn and slot them all together to find some sort of favorable assortment of mana affecting the board immediately. So in other words, when you top deck a Phantom Militia, or you just have one sitting in hand and you're on 9 mana, rarely would you want to play 3 Phantom Militias. Often you'd want to play a reasonably statted Taunt, like Tar Creeper, and then do something else with your turn. Spend that 6 mana in a much richer, more rewarding way with the cards that you have. So I don't see how Phantom Militia ever makes sense. It's that flexibility is just not worth it in a control-style deck. Now, if Phantom Militia were, for instance, like Jungle Raptor, that was stealth and a 4/2 and it had Echo, that would be freaking amazing, because an aggro deck could really utilize that. They could play a nicely statted minion on turn 3 that's super aggressive, and if they top-decked it late when they're running out of cards, they could play 3 Jungle Panthers and have an awesome board for a ton of aggression that's hard to deal with. That would work really nicely, because an aggro deck benefits more from the flexibility of Echo than would a control deck. So a card that's more slowly minded like this one just doesn't seem to benefit from Echo that much to me. Now that said, in Arena, I'm sure Phantom Militia is awesome, because top decking multiple taunts late game in Arena is fantastic. The mana flexibility is awesome. It's like 3 cards for 1. Sure, it'll be played in Arena. I think it'll be awesome. Constructed, I just don't see it getting quite as much value. I don't think the flexibility matters in this exact alignment and style of card. I'm not saying the flexibility of Echo doesn't matter. I think there will be a lot of playable Echo cards if Blizzard designs them correctly. I just don't think Phantom Militia is it. I think this was merely a means to introduce the new keyword to us at the launch of the expansion, but mostly this card will fall pretty far flat. So now let's move on to the Pumpkin Peasant, one of the new Worgen style cards. Now they identified this as a Worgen card. It doesn't actually say Worgen anywhere. There's no Worgen keyword or card type or anything like that. It doesn't look like a Worgen, but in fact, it is a Worgen, and I guess any card with the effect you're reading here, each turn this is in your hand, swap its attack and health, is what we're supposed to be calling Worgen cards. And you can see the other version of Pumpkin Peasant there as a big old Worgen. He is now a 4-2 instead of a 2-4. And this particular Worgen card also has lifesteal. So is Pumpkin Peasant any good? The answer for me is I don't really think so. Lifesteal as a keyword just hasn't ever been very popular and constructed in the first place. It's just not doing quite enough to impact the board immediately. Often, bigger taunts are more defensive. It's hard to get a lifesteal card to actually do damage and make an attack to heal you in a predictable way. So that's a huge downside. A 2-4 for 3, clearly not exciting. A 4-2 for 3, clearly not exciting. There's tons of 4-3 minions and 3-4 minions out there that would be much, much better. So I don't know who would want to run this card or why you'd run it. It just looks like another throwaway. But, of course, we need to discuss the actual Worgen mechanic and the implications there. Because there is some potential value to having a flexible card like this that, depending upon the matchup, you can play it in a different alignment. You guys hear me all the time when I'm playing Hearthstone talk about how, we need to be the aggressors in this matchup. We need to really push, otherwise they're going to beat us in the late game. Or, we need to play more slow this game. We're the value matchup. We're going to win this by bleeding them out of resources. And in each version of those, maybe you want to play a 2-4 to be defensive and take trades into smaller stuff. Maybe you want to play the 4-2 to be more aggressive. So that has some potential. That's nifty. That flexibility is valuable. It's just this card isn't strong enough in and of itself to make that flexibility viable. If there were better stats, better effects attached to the Worgen thing, I think that could be a really big upside. It is worth noting, though, that the Worgen effect can be a downside, too, because you don't always get to play cards the turn that it lines up perfectly for you. And it's a bit unpredictable because you never know when you're going to draw your Worgen. So it might not be the defensive-minded 2-4 on turn 3 when you need it to be to trade into the small stuff. It might be a 4-2, and it dies to a measly 2-1. That could be a pretty frustrating experience. So it's one of those cards where it's kind of sitting in your hand until it lines up perfectly, and that's a big downside. So I'm not sure the flexibility upside is worth the risk downside for Worgens in general, and then this card isn't good enough by itself, so I don't think we're going to see Pumpkin Peasant very often. This feels like one of those just filler cards to once again introduce the mechanic as opposed to be sort of a standout that we think is playable. And then finally here we have one last card. This is a warrior minion, the Militia Commander, a 4-mana 2-5 that also introduces a new keyword. This keyword is Rush, and Rush is basically charge, but charge in that it can only attack minions the turn that it's summoned onto the board. So kind of like Charged Devilsaur when you play it, in that it can't go face. It can only attack minions. But there is an important distinction between this card and Charged Devilsaur, and that is that if you summon Charged Devilsaur from a Free from Amber or any other recruit effect, that it can go face. Militia Commander would be able to attack immediately because this keyword is innate, it's just on the card, but it wouldn't be able to go face because it doesn't have the battle cry that Charged Devilsaur has. It's just a part of the card. So you could recruit it and it would be able to attack, but it would not be able to attack heroes the turn you recruit it. Now, is that an important aspect for Militia Commander? Not necessarily, but since this is the first time we're seeing the keyword, I did want to spend a little time addressing that distinction. Now, Militia Commander also has a battle cry, gain +3 attack this turn. So the most standard use case for this card is you play it on turn 4 as a 5/5 that gets to attack into a minion immediately, but then loses, importantly, its a gained attack at the end of the turn. It does not remain a 5/5. So you get to take one good trade. Let's just say you trade into a Chillwind Yeti, for instance. And then at the end of the turn, it becomes a 2/1 because it took 4 damage from the Yeti. It loses its attack. So clearly a charging 5/5 or a rushing 5/5 is amazing. That's wonderful. You're going to get a lot of value trade opportunities on turn 4. It's almost always going to have something that can take a favorable trade. And going 2 for 1 with a card is really quite strong. Now, the problem with this card to me is that it is left behind as a pretty weak 2-1 or 2-4, whatever it might be. It's not going to impact the board very much on the following turn. So a weird comparison I thought of with this card immediately, and there might be better comparisons, frankly, is something like Jade Lightning. It's, it allows you to clear a minion, and it summons you a smaller dude. Clearly, Jade Lightning has some advantages. You can go face, you can go behind taunts. Militia Commander can't do all that stuff. Jade Lightning can also summon a 7/7 from time to time, right? Because of the way the Jade mechanic allows it to escalate. So, Militia Commander to me looks a bit like a worse Jade Lightning. Now, Jade Lightning is a great card. Jade Lightning gets played. So I guess really I do think this card would be a good play on turn 4 most of the time. Just getting that good value trade. It's not an aggressively minded card at all. This would be played in a slightly more defensive, maybe a mid-range warrior as sort of a mid-cost Alexstrasza's champion kind of thing. Again, Alexstrasza's champion can go face. So there's a bit of a distinction there. But that sort of thing where Alexstrasza's champion is really good when it trades in like 2/3s. I've been playing it a bit in Wild recently. That's when it's really powerful. And it feels like Militia Commander could be that kind of card where it gets that good value trade. It puts your opponent on the back foot. They got to think about these extra stats on the board. So I could see a warrior that utilizes Militia Commander. Not necessarily great in a recruit deck because it comes out as a 2/5. That's far less exciting. But this feels like the kind of card that could do it. A 5/5 getting onto the board and making an immediate impact is often good. You like cards that do things quickly, that have good stats, and it feels like Militia Commander could do exactly that. Sometimes it's just going to be like a Fireball that clears a minion, and Fireball is fine sometimes as a card that clears a minion. So I think Militia Commander might just see play. Now, of course, right now, Warrior sucks. So if Warrior doesn't get any good cards, Militia Commander is going to suck too, at least for a little while. But I think fundamentally speaking, the card has potential to see play. It seems like it's doing enough immediately, fast enough, good stats. That means that the potential is there. As long as Warrior becomes good, I think Militia Commander could make the cut too. And there you have it, folks. That's it for my detailed reviews here of these 6 cards. What I'd like to do now is go through and do some quick reviews where I rank each of these cards from 1 to 5 stars based on their competitive viability in standard format. So this isn't Wild format, this isn't Arena. I'm thinking about these exactly in a standard format kind of context. So let's go ahead and jump into the quick reviews. Ginn Greymane is a 2-star card. Baku the Mooneater is a 2-star card. Azalina Soulthief is a 1-star card. Phantom Militia is a 2-star card. Pumpkin Peasant is a 1-star card. Militia Commander is a 4-star card. And there you have it, folks. That wraps up part 1 of my Witchwood card review. Pretty exciting stuff. I love this theme. This artwork behind me is so cool. I absolutely adore it. So, of course, guys, I get stuff wrong all the time. Occasionally I get some stuff right, too. That's why I want to hear your take on these cards in the comments below. What do you think is going to work? What's not going to work? What classes work for Genn and Baku? Is Lifesteal actually amazing? Is Echo going to change Hearthstone? I want all of your thoughts. Let's crowdsource some intelligence on these cards in the comments below. But until then, everybody, thank you so much for watching. And until next time, game on.